You are listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And today our guest is
Safwan Omari.
Hey, Safwan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you share with the listening audience your role here at Lewis University?
Yeah, so I have been with Lewis since 2011. I have been pretty much in the computing space, teaching in cybersecurity, computer science, information technology. And then most recently, I have taken on the Associate Dean for the College of Aviation, Sciences and Technology.
So two bosses here with me.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to change anything for you, Mallory, at all. Today we're going to be talking about the Metaverse. And this I don't know what the right way of framing it would be, but an alternative reality space where people can go. It's also associated with virtual reality and augmented reality. Metaverse is simply a term which has been coined to describe alternative places. And there's even been movies made about, places like the Metaverse. Ready Player One, for example, is a good example of putting on your headset and then transitioning from the world in which you physically live to an alternative virtual reality space. And Safwan has a lot of experience in this area and wants to share what he knows with everybody. So if you were to define, Safwan, the Metaverse to somebody who didn't know what that was, how would you do that?
Yeah, so there are many ways in which you can kind of define it. First of all, it's kind of a combination of technology. The metaverse kind of combination of technology that enables a new way of kind of interacting. One way to think about metaverse is people refer to it as the next generation of the internet. It's a more kind of immersive version of the internet. It's a 3D environment where people can meet and can basically communicate, right? So if we just basically look at it from that perspective, it's an internet, right? Internet boils around basically communication, right? So basically having people together. And the way you get into the internet is basically you use a two-dimensional screen with a browser. You go to a certain website and then you interact. Most of the interaction is going to be between the end user or you as an individual with the website itself. There are other forms of communication like peer-to-peer communication, like chat. We were just talking about chatting, right? So you could kind of, talk to people on the other side, not necessarily the website itself, through chat tools or through feedback and things like that. But it seems more of an isolated experience, right? Metaverse is a little bit more real time, where first of all, the space that you get in is actually three-dimensional, right? So you feel like you are in a virtual space. So it is different than just looking at two-dimensional screen. So it is it feels like more real. It is more immersive. You are in that space. Everything around you is three-dimensional. You can look at it from different angles. And the bigger one is actually interacting with people, right? So we have avatars. So you could have multiple avatars in that same virtual space, so where people kind of talk to each other now. So these are kind of, the biggest differences with the internet, the two-dimensional internet.
As the avatar, are you seeing, like when you play a video game, are you seeing yourself as like a character you're moving around, or do you see like through the eyes of your avatar, not seeing yourself the way you do as a human?
Actually, you see it through your eyes. So you see the other person, and it does feel very, very real.
Oh.
So one of the things that we built over the past year is kind of a virtual mall, right? So basically, we built this virtual mall. We put several stores in it, and then we did host it on Altspace VR. So Altspace VR is a platform developed or owned by Microsoft. They kind of shut it down right now, but we host it. It's kind of GoDaddy for a website, right? So you host your website up there. So Altspace VR, we put our mall in there, and we started getting visitors from all over the world. So we have people from Brazil, we have people from England, we had people even from Chicago. So I mean, I used to go in there, and then I did meet a few people, and it does feel very, very real. I mean, you talk to them, and it feels like, you are actually talking to a person. It's much different than if you are kind of communicating through a website or a chat tool because somehow it feels very real. So I talk to people from Chicago, from Brazil, from England, and it does feel very, very real, the interaction.
What stores did you have in your mall, and did you make any money?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Actually, we started with a furniture store.
Oh.
So that's one. Because, usually you need some sort of a killer app or a killer niche. The biggest advantage of VR over a traditional two-dimensional website is visualization, right? So basically, if you go into this space, and then you can definitely see the furniture, much different than if you just look at a two-dimensional picture.
Yeah.
So we started with putting in a furniture store in there, and then also real estate. So basically, if you have an apartment, right, and then you want to visualize it, so we have like one model, a realistic model of actually a house. So you can actually teleport. So we call it teleporting. So you are in one virtual space, and then you jump to another virtual space. This is kind of, you are on one website, you click on a link, and all of a sudden you are on a different website, right? So in Metaverse, we call it teleportation. So you click on something, or you just basically walk into something, and then all of a sudden you are in the apartment, right? So that is basically where we started with kind of something that needs high fidelity visualization.
So this could be something like eventually for actual real estate and house hunting, you just go into the metaverse and go to all the different homes you were interested in. And then you could go from there to actually physically go there in the real world.
Yeah.
You could save a lot of time. But what's coming in my head is that the metaverse is actually a multiverse, so that there isn't one online, place, but there's just this series of places, and the list of the number is getting larger and larger. And so, for example, you created and hosted one, and then people from anywhere, you made it available so that anybody in the world could enter into your particular, virtual space. And then other people around the world are also creating these virtual spaces that you then you can choose to enter into. And then there, you can, if you create it, you could then restrict who has access and who doesn't have access. Apparently, the one that you created is generally available for anybody who wants to just come enter and walk around. So literally, when you enter into some of these metaverses, you could be just randomly walking into and engaging with somebody you've never met before, and you have no idea who you might find.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there is multiple platforms where people can host their virtual walls. So we call them virtual walls. And then you can definitely teleport between the different virtual walls. This is literally kind of, you are moving between websites.
Is this like an advanced version of Minecraft?
Yeah.
Because don't kids make their own little Minecraft worlds, and then they build things in it, and other kids can join in? And I don't know. I've never played.
Yeah,
Minecraft.
or like Roblox or Rec Room or any of those video game things where they can make video games.
And then other people can enter into the game with them.
Yeah. I've always found it my son always wants to buy clothes for his avatar in these games where I'm like, you want me to spend real world money for a digital t-shirt?
Well, the people who made the game certainly would like you to do that.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
But the kid wants it too. He's like, I want to look a certain way. And I'm like, but it's a video game. But I get it, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very real thing. People are willing to spend a lot of real cash on those things. I mean, I'm not sure if you remember the NFTs, right? So a year ago, I mean, they actually spent millions of dollars buying these funny photos, right? They call them, NFTs.
Right.
They call them
non-fungible
tokens.
Tokens, yes.
Which is literally doesn't mean anything except that, this is something that is recorded on a blockchain that says you own it, right? Nothing more than that. I mean, there's nothing special about the picture itself. Anybody can copy it. Anybody can get a copy of it free. But it's just the fact that you did actually pay this amount of money to acquire it. So it's more of a status thing.
Wasn't there a virtual like NFT house that somebody paid like $500,000 for during that whole thing? I heard. So there's like a digital house out there. I mean, maybe in the metaverse they can use it and live
Just
there.
don't tell your son about it.
Yeah.
Mom, I want to live there.
$500,000.
Mom, can I live there instead of here? I want to live there. So this is an interesting technology that I think is only in its very infancy, because it hasn't. I mean, we hear about the different platforms, and I know, Facebook wants to have their own metaverse, and Google wants to have their own metaverse, and you can have meeting rooms where I know that in the business sector they're saying instead of traveling to have meetings, just do virtual metaverse meetings
or instead of Zooming.
Exactly. And so then everybody puts on their goggle set, and it doesn't matter where you are, you're in a conference room. And some people, you can actually have somebody walk up and start literally writing on a board. And then as they're writing on the board, everybody who's participating in the meeting can see what's being written on the board. And it looks like it's like you're actually in the room, except it's not authentic. It's not exactly, but it's beginning to go that direction. So then the question is going to be, are we ever going to leave our houses ever again?
It kind of also sounds to me like choosing to live in the Matrix, like from the movie, where we could all just be like in pods being fed through tubes and then just living in a virtual space with headsets. I mean, I'm not saying it's not necessary. Like, I'm sure people freaked out when the internet first came around and were like, oh no, people are going to be glued to screens, which they are. But I'm not afraid of the metaverse. It just seems like society might fragment into the group that lives most of their life online and the group that lives most of their life in reality.
Well, the question is it going to be an addiction? Will somebody, to your point, prefer to live in the metaverse as opposed to the real world? And at that point, is it like a variation of a drug to them? It's impacting their mind. It's impacting, their happiness, and so they choose to bury themselves, to separate from what I might refer to as reality, and exist exclusively in this virtual place.
What do you think about that, Safwan?
Which is happening right now. I mean, a lot of people live on the internet. So this is a very real thing. I'm not sure
social media. Excuse me, social media.
Social media, I mean, they live literally on, social media in that virtual space. Now, I'm not sure if the metaverse, like, given the fact that it's going to be 3-dimensional, is it going to make that, take it to a new level? Is it going to be the same? I'm not sure about that. But there are some kind of fantasies around metaverse, but there are some real applications about VR. If training and education is one of them, it's a very, very real thing. The things that you can do in VR and the metaverse, many of them are things that you cannot do in the physical world. Think about, for example, so we're talking about building some VR experiences for aviation maintenance, for example, right?
Oh, right. I could see the usefulness of that.
Yeah, so think about kind of the scale of things that you can train students. So right now, if you want to buy the physical components, you're going to be definitely limited with how many you can buy, the different types. But if you build a VR experience with that, there is no limit on how many different brands, how many different types, how many different components you can bring into VR. Definitely building a 3D model of some component is going to be much, much cheaper than buying the physical thing, right? And in this virtual space, you can basically take it apart, put it together, point out at a specific piece, and things like that. So even with that very basic experience, it's a big advantage over the physical thing. And then the next step, like similar to what happened with the internet, so we start with the internet started with static content, right? So basically you go to a website, you read, you look at a video or an image. The next step was user-generated content, right? So basically people kind of started to add content to the internet. And that's going to happen also with the metaverse and virtual worlds, right? So imagine a classroom where you do have a 3D model of an aircraft, right? A student can actually go in there and add notes. So basically he can highlight a specific component and say, I have a question about this, right? So he can write a question and attach it in a 3-dimensional space to a specific component in the aircraft, right? The instructor can come later, right? And then basically he can answer. Now, all of a sudden you have a history of interaction. You cannot do this in a physical space, right? So there are things that you can do in VR, in the metaverse, that you cannot do in the physical space.
I also want to clue in on that or zoom in on that when you use the word instructor. The instructor in this model that you just described doesn't have to be human. So, for example...
Oh, no, my job.
Yeah.
so this metaverse, the academy in some sense that Safwan was describing, the instructor who comes in and responds to student questions could be in artificial intelligence.
Yeah. I can also see it applying the metaverse to, say, practicing surgery before you work on a real person, or any of those things where you can do anything with a physical object without the risk of actually harming a life.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be the next podcast.
Oh, virtual surgery. And with that, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. You would think I haven't read this a million times. All right, you've been listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White
and
Safwan Omari.
Thanks.